Hey, what's going on, everybody? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew. I'm one of the coaches over here at SaberSim. And in this video, we are going to be covering all things contest sim. So we actually sent out a survey to our ultimate subscription subscribers. And what we did was we asked a multiple of questions in that survey. But one specific question we asked was, what is your biggest question about how contest sims work? We got a ton of good responses to that question. So what I've done is I went into the survey, extracted all those questions, and we're just going to be hitting them one at a time here, hitting like the most common questions, starting from the ground up and just giving you guys a good idea, all things contest sims here. So let me get SaberSim pulled up. We're just going to work our way through these questions, and then that will be the end of this show. So first question we had here was, how do I get the DraftKings specific contest to upload into SaberSim? I can't figure that out. So really what I'm going to show you guys is basically how to import your contest from DraftKings into SaberSim and then how to create a contest sim. So first thing I'm going to do, go to my contest tab. I'm going to go to my contests. I'm going to get this pop-up here. Say, please upload your entries file for this slate. I can use this download template file from DraftKings button. If I'm signed in to DraftKings, SaberSim is going to go communicate with DraftKings, find the entries file for the slate you have selected in the top left, and then download that file. And then from there, I can just drag the file and drop it into that box. And then now I have a contest for this slate. So now to create a contest sim, all I need to do is right click on the contest name. I'm going to get this pop-up that says add contest sim. When I click this, SaberSim is automatically going to pick the correct set of field lineups for you. Pick the correct payout structure, fill in the contest size, fill in the percent to first, fill in the percent entries paid, and then it's going to tell you how many times you're running the contest sim. So this contest sim is going to be ran 100,000 times. You're going to see these use live sims if available option is toggled on by default. The use live field lineups if available toggle is toggled on by default. We'll get to more of those later, but just want to give you guys an idea of what all goes in to your contest sim being created. When I hit save settings and I go to my build, when I pop open the settings tab, when I open this contest sim settings dropdown, boom, the contest sim that we just created is right here. So all I need to do is check it. If I have multiple contest sims, I need to star one, because when you run your actual lineups, only one set of contest sims is displayed underneath the lineup. So whatever contest sim you have starred is going to be the results that are shown for the lineups that are being shown. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but just wanted to give you guys a quick overview there. So second question here, let's get this one in the chat. Second question says, is it better to sim against a base pool or the pool of your lineups? Great question. So the way that SaberSim does contest sims is that we have multiple buckets of field lineups. Okay. Think of the field lineups as an ownership build. So there is an ownership build. The build gets ran. Lineups get created. The exposures from that build become the ownership projections. Okay. So then if you come into this gear icon, you're going to see that there are 13 different buckets of ownership. This is for classic slates, and this is for NFL, MLB, and NBA currently. We are currently still building this out to other sports and other slate types, etc. here, okay? So you're going to see these 13 different buckets. So what we have done is we have went into contests and done a ton of back testing based on stakes, based on entry limit. And we have found the similarities between those contests. We have grouped contests into one of these 13 buckets, and then we build lineups with certain settings, and we use optimizer mode as opposed to sim mode and rules and different things like that. And we create lineups that are trying to represent the lineups that will be played across these different contest buckets. Okay. So a lot of back testing went into this. We actually did a pro video with Eric. If you guys missed it, talking about everything that went into this. That was a great pro video, a great reason to be on the pro or ultimate plan to get access to that pro exclusive content. We do have a playlist up on the YouTube channel here. So if you go to playlists and then you go to understanding contest sims, I did do a video after my show with Eric talking about field lineups. So this field lineups explained video goes into some of the key points from that video with Eric. But basically we have the field lineups right? And then from the field lineups, those are its own pool. Okay. So then when you run a contest sim, you build your own lineups. You build your own set of 5,000 lineups here. The way that we run the contest sims is we take your contests, we put them into a contest with the field lineups. We play that out 100,000 times. You see the number of sims 100,000 times. And then we return lineup metrics. We return the ROI on average for your lineup across all the 100,000 sims, the win rate, the cash rate, the ROI standard deviation, the dupes, and the risk adjusted ROI. Okay. So I just want to be clear that the ROI, cash rate, win rate, dupes, ROI standard deviation, those 5 come directly from the contest sim. The risk adjusted ROI is calculated after the contest sims are finished. The risk adjusted ROI looks at those other 5 metrics and then gives the lineup a risk adjusted ROI score. We'll talk a little bit more about that after, but just trying to get the basics down. So we like the idea of taking a hypothetical set of field lineups, putting your lineups into that hypothetical contest with those field lineups one at a time, running that 100,000 times for each individual lineup in your set of 5,000 lineups. So that is how we do it. That is how we suggest you do it. The option that you're talking about, which some other content sites do, is they take your lineups, they run it in a contest sim against itself. Well, you know, in the lineup that you run, you're typically not doing a lot to try and directly reflect the field. What SaberSim is trying to do is build the best lineups possible to win your GPPs. It's not trying to build a set of lineups that accurately represents the field. You're going to see leverages. You're going to see, high exposures to players. So what I would do is use one of our buckets that are made to try and mimic the field. So I like using a pre-built pool rather than simming against my own set of lineups. All right. Good question there. And then this one I kind of touched on already, but I do want to hit it again. Says how many sims are run before arriving at ROI, risk-adjusted ROI, and cash rate numbers. So whatever number is designated in this field here, so where it says number of sims in the contest sim settings, this is 100,000 by default. That is as high as we go here. So 100,000 contest sims were run for each lineup of your 5,000 before returning the metrics for that individual lineup. But good clarification. All right, next question here. ROI on the sims, how is that even calculated? Great question. So what we do is every time we run your contest sim, the lineup has an entry fee, right? So say the entry fee is $10. So every single time, so what we're going to do is we're going to do 10 times 100,000. So the entry fee times the number of sims, that would be 1,000,000. So that number goes in the denominator. Every single time we run the contest sim, we are going to add up how much money the lineup won over the 100,000 contest sims, put that number in the numerator. So then it would be however much the lineup won divided by the total number of entry fees. That returns a percentage, and then that percentage ends up being your ROI. So let's say that, we ran the contest sim 100,000 times. Maybe at the end of all the contest sims, your lineup returned $1.1 million. You do that divided by the entry fees of 1,000,000. Well, then your ROI for that lineup would be 10%. So on average, that lineup won $11 and paid $10 to be in the contest. So that is how ROI is calculated. All right, another good question here. Question says, what is the most valuable number and when to use each between ROI, cash rate, win rate, etc.? Great question. So our suggestion here is to use risk-adjusted ROI. The reason for that is because risk-adjusted ROI looks at all the other 5 metrics that are created and then gives the lineup a risk-adjusted ROI score after the fact. What risk-adjusted ROI is doing, it's looking at how often the lineup wins and how much it wins versus how often the lineup loses and how much it loses. And then it's giving it a score. So the reason it's called risk-adjusted ROI, it is looking at the payout distribution of the lineup and then figuring out how high variance is this lineup. So an example I use all the time is that if you have 2 lineups with the same sim ROI, let's say 100%, One lineup could have binked 3 times and never cashed again in the most extreme example. One lineup could have cashed 1 time. I'm sorry, it could have binked 1 time, but it had a bunch of other high percentile finishes where maybe it didn't win, but it did get across the cash line more. It did have a lot more high finishes. This second lineup is going to be less risky than the first. Therefore, the second lineup would get a better risk-adjusted ROI score. So that is why we like that metric. And then if you go to our help docs here in the top right, go to our hamburger menu, open up our library. We've released a couple new videos here in the support docs. So the first one is ROI. You can just search it here. And then it says, what do ROI and risk-adjusted ROI mean? This is a short 3-minute video I made recently talking about the differences. And then the other one is the dupes metrics. So this one says, what is the dupes contest sim metric? And then it will break it down for you in this 4-minute video here as well. So we have some more resources here available for you guys if you guys need to rewatch any of those things and brush up on what those things mean. But that takes us right into our next question here. Question was, how does dupes work? Great question. So in your pool of lineups, if we run the sims and we put a lineup into your pool, we can always run the sims again and get the same group of players as the best lineup. But when we build your lineups, we're never going to put the same lineup into your pool more than once. We're never going to put it in twice. However, when we run the ownership build, if the same combination of players shows up more than once, we do allow that lineup to go into the field lineups. And then in the field lineups, there are 10,000 field lineups. So let's say that the same lineup shows up 5 times. Well, that is what the dupes metric is telling you. Like, hey, when we ran the contest sim, we noticed that your lineup was also played 5 other times in our field lineups of 10,000. So then across 10,000 field lineups, your lineup showed up 5 times. This is more of a problem for showdowns and small slates with small player pools, things like that. But that gives you an idea of how likely this lineup is to be duplicated. And then the other good thing is that when we run the contest sim, we are taking that into account. So if that lineup wins, that lineup is going to split, places 1 through 6 with those other 5 lineups that also had the same lineup. So then it affects the payout and then affects the ROI of the lineup to give you a more accurate representation of how much that lineup is actually winning, because we are accounting for those dupes in the contest sim. All right. Next question. Question says, how accurate are the contest sims and do they perform better than SaberScore? Great question. So the way I'd like to describe this is SaberScore is the 80-20 of contest sims. SaberScore is great. It was built on top of contest sims, but it makes a lot of not assumptions, but it groups a lot of things together, right? So in this case, we are grouping all 20 max contests between 10 to 50K entries as a single SaberScore, right? So what SaberScore does is it encompasses a lot more contests per interval, right? So when we go to our SaberScore metrics here, we have large slate, 10 to 50K. This doesn't really say, hey, is this a 150 max? Is it a 20 max? Like, how many entries are in this are allowed in this contest? What are the stakes of this contest, right? Those things are taken into account in the ownership projections, a little bit in the build settings, but SaberScore has to have a little bit more of a blanket approach. So it's built on top of contest sims, but it's not as specific as contest sims. That's why I call it the 80-20. Contest sims, you can run a different contest sim for each contest that you're playing and get as specific as possible with the payout structures, with the cash rates, with the contest sizes, right? You're not just grouping any contest between, an 11,000 entrant contest is a lot different than a 49,000 entrant contest, right? They're all kind of getting grouped together here. So not to say SaberScores are bad. I think SaberScore is still good. I just think it makes a lot more, it's all encompassing for all of these contests. And while contest sims on a contest by contest basis are a lot more specific. So you're going to get that extra 20% by using the contest sims. All right. This is a good question here. Question says, what is the biggest flaw with SaberSim's contest sims? I think this is a great question. One of the things I would say is that, the field lineups pre-slate only go to 10,000 lineups total. This number used to be 5,000. So we are continuing to try and scale that number. But when you're playing, really large contests like on an NFL Sunday, comparing a contest sim with 10,000 field lineups to an actual contest, if you're playing like the $3.20 max with, 2 to 300,000 entries, can be a lot different. So I'd say the raw number of field lineups is one of the, flaws or shortcomings with it. But if you're using the live contest sim, which we'll talk about a little bit, once you start using the live contest sim, we're actually scaling the number of lineups that we're using in the contest sim up to 50,000 lineups. So that is definitely new, using those 50,000 lineups, but it's still not getting to the entire contest size. So something that the team is always constantly aware of and working on, and we continue to try to grow that number of contests of lineups that we're using in the contest sim. So definitely something that we are continuing to iterate over and improve. All right, next question. When is the best time to put my special sauce in? It seems the SaberSim answer is to make minimal adjustments when building lineups, then making changes before simming the contest. I'm gradually learning. I think this is a great question. So the good thing about using a set of field lineups is that these are pre-generated. These are already made. Regardless of what your lineups look like, your lineups are going into the field with these field lineups. So whatever you do is not having a big impact. So I think it's a great time in the lineup building process to put in your special sauce. Make your lineups look like what you want them to look like. And then all you're doing is you're taking those lineups, putting them into the contest sim with the field, and then you're seeing how your saucy lineups did against the field lineup. So, whatever your secret sauce is, isn't going to have a big impact on what the field does. So you're not rebuilding field lineups with your sauce. You're just putting, the sauce into building your lineups and then seeing how those grade out in the contest sim. So I would always do that up front, make your lineups look however you want them to look like. Remember that we are running the contest sim for all the lineups in your pool, not just the top 20, not just the top 150. So if you want to, have your value adds and different things like that, make sure you do that before generating your lineups and then run the contest sim and then see which of your lineups grades out the best in the contest sim. But really good question. All right, next question. Question says, are contest sims different in terms of how the models are built than what you normally run for all contests, or is it the exact same? Great question. So the contest sims and the field lineups. So the field lineups get generated from our ownership builds. There are certain differences between the lineups we run for you when you build your lineups and the ownership build. One of the major ones is we use an optimizer, a traditional optimizer or optimizer mode rather, for doing that, because we know that a lot of the rest of the lineups in your contest are not using play-by-play sims. They're using optimizers trying to put in as many projected points as possible. So that's one part of it, right? So we're using optimizer mode. We're also doing different things with like groups and rules and trying to make those back-tested ideas from creating those buckets, trying to implement those into the bucket. So we understand what the contests look like on average. The chalk is going to be chalkier. Some of the best value plays are going to be higher owned. And we are putting in certain parameters to make sure those things are reflected in the field lineups. So that process is much different than when you build your lineups on sim mode, randomly sampling the sims and building the highest upside lineups. So definitely a difference in how those two things work. All right, next question here. And then I did just want to mention this. So when we actually run the contest sim the 100,000 times, what we do is we pluck an individual game sim from each game on the slate. We play out the game, and then we see how the lineup scored, and then we assign the payouts, and then we do that again and again. So when we actually do the contest sim, we are running each game on the slate one time, and then creating a single slate simulation, and then assigning the payouts based on that set of simulations. All right, another good question here. Question says, within a 5,000 lineup theoretical field, can you sufficiently account for lineup duplication in contests like showdowns, MMA, etc.? Great question here. So showdowns are going to be the biggest. So, NFL showdowns, you're going to have, tens of thousands to like close to 100,000 entries at times here. So those are going to be harder. Some of these other smaller contests, I think like the MMA flagship is about, 20 to 30,000 entrants. I think you get a lot closer with a sport like MMA, right? Just because the difference is there's not so big of a gap, right? So keep that in mind. Contest size, very important. I would still really recommend using things like geometric mean, trying to account for duplication through salary, through lineup construction, through stat construction, etc. here. So I don't think that the dupes metric alone is end all be all. Like, hey, just use the dupe metrics, you'll be good. I think that you should do more things to try and account for duplication. So in the help docs, if you type in geometric mean, you're going to find this video, how do ownership product and ownership geometric mean work? This is a great 4-minute video talking about the differences between sum ownership, product ownership, geometric mean, how to apply them in the app across all subscription tiers, and how to use them as rules, how to use it as filters, how to use it as a custom metric, etc. here. So I'd really recommend continuing to do other things to account for duplication besides just using the contest sims dupe metric. All right. Next question here. Question says, running a sim for a contest with lower entries than the selected field lineups, does it randomly sample the field X amount of times? Great question. So what we do, say we have 10,000 field lineups. Well, maybe you're only playing a 1,000 entry contest. What we will do each time we run the contest sim, and remember, we're running it 100,000 times, we will randomly sample 1,000 different lineups from the set of 10,000 field lineups each time we run the contest sim. So, contest sim 1, we're going to take 1,000 lineups. Contest sim 2, we're going to take a new set of a random sample of 1,000 lineups from the field lineups. And then we're going to do that over and over each time we do that. And remember, we're doing it for each lineup on a lineup by lineup basis. So the numbers get very, very large, but that is how we do it. We are randomly sampling 1,000 field lineups from the 10,000 each time you run the contest sim for each of your lineups. All right. Next question here. And I do want to say that, one other thing with this, which I saw earlier, is that people are like concerned about, hey, we're going to, maybe we're not going to accurately represent the ownership if we're randomly sampling. Well, the contest sim is run so many times, being 100,000 times, that those numbers flatten out. So just the raw amount of times we're running it ends up flattening out those differences and gives you a better idea. But remember, ownership projections are not perfect. They are an estimate, and ownership can come in differently. So randomly sampling and having some differences in there actually probably is a better way to do it, because you're not for certain that ownership is going to come in the way it does, right? So if you guys remember the Raheem Mostert example from earlier in the NFL season, where he was projected for like 35-ish% ownership across the industry, and he came in at like 55%, right? So if you're playing a small field, well, hey, there's going to be some contest sims where his ownership does get inflated, and it is more representative of some of the differences and the range of outcomes for his ownership, right? So just wanted to mention that. All right, next question. How do the sims account for custom projections? Great question. So the way that we do it is that whatever numbers are in the My Projection column when you run your contest sim are what are going to be used. So if you had increased Terry McLaurin's projection from 16 to, say, 18 here, well, every time we run the contest sim, we're going to account for that adjustment. So when we run the contest sim, if Terry McLaurin scores 14, he's going to score 16 in the contest sim. Then that will affect the scores of the lineups in the contest sim, right? So we are taking your adjustment, applying it in the contest sim to how Terry McLaurin actually did, and then using that to affect the standings and the payout structure and what lineup won first, etc. So your adjustments get put into the sims when we run the contest sim. All right, a couple more questions here. Next one is, when I run multiple contest sims at once, are they using the projections from each separate field that I've created? I have some builds that are representations of the field using different projection sources, or do the contest sims all use the same projection source? Great question. So within a build here, So you can sim against different field lineups, right? So if I had a build 3 and a build 4 and I had different field lineups, what I would make sure I do is in my contest sims, I would make sure my field lineup source is one of those other builds, right? So I'd make sure my field lineup source is correct. When you actually run the contest sim, remember, we are taking your lineups in this build and playing it out against the other lineups in the field lineups that you've indicated. So within this build, we are using the projections from this build. So we are using the values in the my projection column for this contest sim. Okay. So whatever projections that you see here are the projections that are used, but we are still randomly sampling the sims, and we have 5,000 game sims for each game on the slate. So creating 100,000 different slate simulations for each lineup times 5,000, right? So the sims are getting sampled very widely here, but we are using the projection adjustments from this build only. All right. Good question there. Next question. Question says, how really leveraged lineups score in the contest sim? This is a good question, right? So really, I think you saw this a lot if you're using contest sims for MLB season, is that you get these very highly leveraged lineups showing up a lot at the top if you sorted by ROI by itself. Well, that's because kind of what I talked about earlier, like, hey, when the lineup does well, it has a very clear path to first place. But out of 100,000 sims, you know, it might only do good a couple times. So what is the likelihood that that event actually occurs, right? So Will was talking about this in a recent pro video here, and he's basically saying that, you know, when I sorted by ROI, I got the underdog stacked as, you know, a 5-1 stack in the World Series, but when I sorted by risk-adjusted ROI, I got the favorited team as a 5-1 stack. So risk-adjusted ROI is able to account for that leverage. If you want to play ultra leveraged lineups, I would stick with ROI. If you don't want to play as ultra leveraged lineups, use risk adjusted ROI. It is still accounting for the ROI of the lineup, but it is just adding those other factors that we talked about earlier. All right, this is our last question. Question says, I want to be able to sort by win rate for showdown, but also add that I want a low owned unique lineup. So this is a great opportunity to use custom metrics, right? So what I would do here is I would make a metric that is the geometric mean of the lineup, so I can understand the duplication impact of the lineup. And then I would take my contest sim metrics here, and then I would put them in a custom metric, right? So I would take a custom metric, I would add variables. So then I'm going to put something like, I'm going to come in here and do win rate as one option. I'm going to come in here and do geo mean as another option. And where is it? Dupes, standard deviation. I'm not seeing it, and it should be here because I do have it as another metric. So let me just delete this. Let's try again here. So open it up. It's gone. Add metric. My own product geo mean value. I'm going to title it geo mean. Saving that. Okay, now it's available for me as a lineup sorting metric. Great. So then let's try again. So add custom metric. And I don't see it, but I do see some optimals. So interesting. I will look into this, but typically what should happen is that when you create a custom metric, it should be available to you to add as part of another custom metric. And then what I would have done is put win rate and geo mean into a custom metric, probably normalize them, and then figured out if I wanted to weigh them at all. But typically you can do that. I will make sure I get a bug logged, but you guys should be able to do that in the near future. But that about does it, guys. Those were all the great questions that I saw in the survey. Hope this gives you guys some answers to your most common questions here about contest sims. I'm going to be putting this video in the Understanding Contest Sims playlist on YouTube. So until you guys see me on our regularly scheduled office hours, I will see you guys later. Take care. Bye.